Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. In the recent five-state elections in India, Congress party won one state, that is Telangana, while BJP won three states. After that, a narrative has started that this three-state victory by BJP indicates an obvious win by BJP in the upcoming 2024 Lok Sabha election for prime ministership. How far is this true? Also, a discussion has started that with this win by Congress in Telangana and Congress's recent previous win in Karnataka, BJP has now lost all states in southern India while BJP is gaining states in northern India. So, does that indicate a clear distinction between the politics that exist in the northern and southern states in India? Or what are the other reasons for the wins and losses? And what can we expect from the Indian political scenario in the coming times? To talk more on this, we have with us today a very distinguished guest, Mr. Dilip Cherian. Mr. Dilip Cherian is the former editor of Business India. He's also a very well-known political campaign advisor, a columnist, and a very sought-after commentator in various TV news channels on the topics of politics and economics.
The way the entire speaker judgment issue in Maharashtra was handled, it was very clear in the way that the speaker even read out very haltingly his own judgment that this was something that was pre-decided. So it's batting outside the crease. I don't think it's an even race for a very simple reason that you've got an uneven platform on which you're playing. That's one. And I'm not going to specify what I mean by that. I have said enough by calling it an uneven platform.
If another political party comes today into India, they would also learn that what works is to show yourself in a very glorified way through all institutions and not to have a questioning system.
It will take time before enough people see that, hey, this is not what we want. Is that time yet? The answer is perhaps not. I tend to believe that sometimes the right thing takes a lot of time to become the winning thing.
There was a time when Congress party actually crossed 400 seats, but because Congress party's presence was all over India. Whereas today, in the southern part of India, BJP really doesn't have that kind of a clout. So do you think, if you look at it even mathematically, does it make sense that there is actually going to be a clean, obvious win by BJP?
The biggest opposition is going to come from within the ruling elite. No single group can hold it together if even the smallest group is hurt to a stage where it is willing to respond or react either in anger or in hopelessness. Before a dam bursts, the water level looks extremely high. There is still some more space for the water to rise before the dam can burst.
Would you really blame those who are not doing that line or stay in that course that actually benefits democracy and not win, perhaps give that time?
Most positive scenario is where India becomes confident in itself, does not aggressively want to either taunt or tame the world.
It is very easy to actually criticize somebody who's failing and also somebody who is not in the ruling party. But what I have seen is that there are, in spite of so much of losses, there are still a lot of people who are very enthusiastic to remain in Congress, which I find is very surprising in today's age, where they are not only just out of power, they are demeaned actually all the time from all quarters.
Worst case scenario is where the social fabric is rent because of thoughtless or deliberate actions by one group. In diversity is strength. In diversity is pleasure. In diversity is reality.
So, hello, Dilip. Wonderful to have you on my show, and thanks for finally making the time. Looking forward to hearing your thoughts today.
Thank you.
Wonderful. So, my first question, as somebody like you who has been in the political news for a long time, is the recent five-state elections in India. So in that, Congress won Telengana, where they were nowhere really in the scene a few months prior to it. And so it was a surprise win. And in the other states, and at least two of them, Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, most of opinion polls, exit polls were predicting a clean sweep by Congress. In fact, many independent journalists, like people who go on the ground, like Rajiv Ranjan from Mahol Kya Hai, they stuck out their neck and said that we believe no matter what, Congress is coming back in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh. And the results were surprising. So do you think the reasons were A, that the politics that happens in the northern and southern states in India are very different, as many people are saying, that in terms of people's issues, what people react to, the messaging that works with people are different? Or B, do you think Congress's own conduct has been very different in these two places? Or C, do you think there was some other reasons that made this surprise win, surprise loss?
Um, Thank you, Jay. That's a good question. And I think the answer is probably C, which is that there were a whole bunch of other reasons. And the reasons that I see as dominant in both Chhattisgarh and Madhya Pradesh, and Rajasthan is slightly different, is a sense of overconfidence, which resulted in the fact that everybody became complacent in the last 2 weeks before elections, by which time everybody had already called the election in the Congress's favor in those two states. I think the leadership got complacent, and as a result, the kind of mobilization which they were expected to do didn't actually happen. It's well known that the BJP and the RSS have cadres who have made a fine art of the ability to bring their voters to the polling booth. So I think that the mixture of the great electoral machinery which they have, combined with the complacency at the top in the Congress, resulted, I think, in the fact that despite everybody calling the election in a certain way, the results ended up diametrically opposite to that.
So why different in Telangana? So there were the same people, Congress people. There is no cadre like BJP.
I don't think it's about North and South in this case. I think the Congress was a bit of the underdog right through as far as Telangana was concerned. So the element of keeping a party in fighting form was more evident right through in Telangana. Most people didn't believe that the BRS would get unseated the way they did. And it was the BRS, if anything, which got a little complacent. So the big message I'm giving here is that complacency, which is based on early electoral assessments, is very often one of the primary causes for loss, unless you are the BJP, in which case you never have a dull moment. You're constantly under pressure to perform.
So are you saying that even in the current situation that we see in India, where BJP actually is a very strong party, if that complacence actually goes away from Congress and they really work to the last mile, to the teeth, they can still win every election? Are you saying that?
No, I'm not saying that. That would be extrapolating a little too much. I would say that the possibility of survival for the Congress is based on just forgetting that polls show them ahead at any point in time, fighting tooth and nail for every constituency and every vote. And this is something the Congress party is simply not used to doing. The spoils of war, as it were, is something that they're still enjoying. They don't recognize the fact that they're not just a party in the opposition, they are in danger of being marginalized and virtually non-recognized in most states. So I think that fighting spirit has to return if there's got to be a return or any revival of any kind for Congress numbers.
So what actually worked in Telangana? Can you give a few points?
I don't want to get into that level of detail on what worked in Telangana, but let me just summarize it very at a high level by saying a youngish, feisty leader who was very clearly the front runner to be chief minister, a party cadre that had no hope of actually winning, clinging on to the fact that, hey, we have a leader and we might be able to make it this time. And number three, the fact that the BRS had gotten bloated and, shall I say, very aggressive in its approach to electoral politics.
What do you think has been the political scenario in India post 2014? Do you see a drastic change in terms of glorification of the one in power, the demeaning of all oppositions, literally clownification of the opposition, the messaging, the way messaging happens to people, and the autonomy of institutions, etc.? Do you think there is a drastic change, or do you think it has always been like this?
Parties which win absolute majorities tend to behave in a certain way. Parties which have strong leaders behave in a certain way. Parties which are confident in their ideologies behave in a certain way. At this point of time from 2014, we are seeing almost like a Venn diagram closing in the juxtapositioning of all these three in one party and in one leader. So I'm not surprised that what you're saying as the change in the nature of relationship between the ruling and the ruled is not entirely surprising.
But then okay, go ahead.
What does shock me even today is the inability of the opposition to come up with a mature response. For example, the kind of behavior that is being exhibited just now in response to the invitation to the Ram Mandir, I would say one did not require so much time if all you wanted to do was reject the invitation. The smarter thing would have been to come up with a better approach. And a better approach would have been to say that the day we will celebrate the temple, not the consecration, the temple, is on Ram Navami Day. And that is the day when Bharat will come together to celebrate the opening of a grand temple. You know, you need to be able to be flexible and shift the goalpost if you want to play your game when you know that the team that you're trying to play against is immensely powerful and playing on the turf that it is most comfortable on.
Right. I mean, if I were to flip the other side and say that the issue of Ram Mandir is so sensitive that it is difficult to come up with a very quick answer to it immediately. I would perhaps argue that. But at the same time, you can also say that they should have thought about what they would do to an invitation, and they should have kept their kept their plans very clear. But at the same time, there were also the Shankaracharyas who refused to go, and there was a lot of other things that happened based on things that they were unhappy about, and that could also be something that the Congress party took on, that okay, the Shankaracharyas are also rejecting it. So in any case, this was definitely not something that Congress party wanted, that the religion and politics come together. So yeah, it is perhaps like a deer caught in headlight. At the same time, coming to your previous point that the party who is strong in terms of votes behaves like this. So if I were to say that, so actually Rajiv Gandhi had got more than 400 seats at one point in time. But even then, there was a healthy opposition at the time, which actually brought it down and questioned it and actually got to press. The press covered it, and that could actually become a questioning. Do you think that kind of a scenario, that kind of environment exists today?
You know, Jaya, it's a bit unfair to expect the same scenarios to exist. I think that every party needs to recognize that we are living in an age of digital media, We're living in an age where everything is examined. We're living in an age where memes and troll armies exist. You cannot become ostrich-like and play according to the rules you want to play by or are used to playing by. Simply because you're used to playing by it, it doesn't make it the only logical way to do it. The fact is that you today have a ruling party which is showing an entirely new style of batting outside the crease. Now, there's no point saying, oh, we need to play inside the crease.
What do you mean by batting outside the crease? Give an example.
I'm giving you an example, though I'm not really the kind of person who believes in giving examples. Because if you want examples, it takes time to look at a whole bunch of things and choose the appropriate example. But since you've asked for one just now, I think a good example is the way the entire speaker judgment issue in Maharashtra was handled. Okay, it was very clear in the way that the speaker even read out very haltingly his own judgment that this was something that was pre-decided. Okay, so it's batting outside the crease. I think that you need to expect this every minute. Just as in the case of the Ram Mandir, and to dwell on that a little bit more, you should have expected that they will spring the invitation on you. You should have thought what your response would be. And certainly, if your response was going to be, go away, we're not interested, then you should have learned how to actually present that as an alternate date rather than saying, go away, we are not coming today.
Okay. Now, in that, I would also like to ask you this, that since you're saying that today it is very different and you can't be an ostrich, you have to play by what is the environment today. And in that, I would also like to ask you, so if let's say another political party comes today into India, and they would also learn the same thing, that what works is to show yourself in a very glorified way through all institutions and not to have a questioning system. So they would also learn, and they would see no incentive to create a system which questions them, which is important for democracy. So do you think that later also, whoever comes to power, they will also see that this is the way it works to stay in power, and they will just continue? And do you think that's in the interest of the country?
In a democracy, the problem is that if you're able to fool most of the people most of the time, then you win most of the elections. The fact is that if a party comes to power based on a certain set of promises, works on a certain set of initiatives, and manages to capture a certain percentage of minds, then it gets to rule. That is democracy. Now, if those methods are something that questions the very nature of democracy in the medium term, then it will take time before enough people see that, hey, this is not what we want. Is that time yet? The answer is perhaps not. But the time will come when enough people will say, this is not the way we want our democracy to function. If, for example, the majority of people in India want a theocratic state, then sure, maybe this is the model that works. But if there are enough schisms within that theocratic state, then this system will face its own challenge, but perhaps from within and not necessarily from the opposition.
Right. So as you are saying, I agree with that. It takes time for all the people to understand if all the people are being fooled at the same time. But what you can, I would not say fool, a messaging is working with all the people for some time. It would take time for it to go. But then during that time, would you really blame those who are not doing that line and who are not perhaps behaving as that environment would require to come to power, because in that way which is not really in the interest of democracy, or stay in that course that actually benefits democracy and not win, perhaps give that time and instead of trying to do anything that brings them to power? What do you think is the right thing to do?
There's a distinction between the right thing to do and what needs to be done to keep the party alive. I tend to believe that sometimes the right thing takes a lot of time to become the winning thing. Now, because we are living in a world of short-termism, party cadre also get extremely disillusioned if they don't win time after time. So you've got to pick and choose the wins that you want to fight for. The second part of your question was about compromising with what are fundamental values. I'm not about to make the mistake of advocating abandoning all fundamental values. Though I'm tempted to, but I'm not going to. I'm saying instead that there are elements of practicality that you need to work with. And sometimes even those basic instincts don't kick in fast enough.
All right. So in that light, with these current wins by BJP in so many states, and also the Ram Mandir coming up, the wave that is going to happen with that, and then there's the Bharat Nyaya Yatra that is supposed to happen. There's the opposition alliance. If you weigh them, do you think 2024 is a done deal and there is Abki Bar 400 bar? The slogan by BJP is true, or do you think it's a mind game and still there is a lot of space for an even race to happen?
I don't think it's an even race for a very simple reason that you've got an uneven platform on which you're playing. That's one. And I'm not going to specify what I mean by that. I've said enough by calling it an uneven platform. In addition, you also have an unfair advantage because one party has a leader who's working 24 by 365. And that is the huge advantage that the ruling party today has. When a leader is willing to work 24 by 365, then you need to have on the other side a leader who's willing to work 28 by 365. You need to have the ability to outthink the first leader. And number three, you need to surround yourself with very smart people who can help you do that outthinking. You certainly can't do the outthinking on your own. Now, unless you have all these three, it is not enough, and it will be a difficult fight to cross into the majority region. Forget, being able to stop someone from going to 400.
Right, but at the same time, there's an argument in the other side that there was a time when Congress party actually crossed 400 seats, but because Congress party's presence was all over India. Whereas today, if you look at it, in the southern part of India, BJP really doesn't have that kind of a clout. So do you think, if you look at it even mathematically, does it make sense that there is actually going to be a clean, obvious win by BJP? Or do you think it is going to be, with the current scenario, there is possible that the pockets are there where you can win and it's possible to win?
I think that we need to distinguish between the Congress party winning and the and the alliance winning. In much of the South, it is the alliance partners who are strong and who may make a major dent. But I don't think that the Congress on its own has got its act together in terms of the states where it is and the seats where it is in a one-to-one battle with the BJP. In those 220 odd seats, the Congress needs to win at least 60 to 80 seats to make a sufficient dent to halt the current run that the BJP is enjoying.
Right. So I'd like to ask you this. It is very easy to actually criticize somebody who's failing and also somebody who is not in the ruling party. But what I have seen is that there are, in spite of so much of losses, there are still a lot of people who are very enthusiastic to remain in Congress, which I find is very surprising in today's age, where they are not only just out of power, they are demeaned actually all the time from all quarters. That's my reading. I want your reading. Do you see at this time there are at least, can you name any 3, 4 points which you think are perhaps solid positive sides of the opposition and or Congress? And do you want to make a few points where you think they could make a change that could bring them any quick positive changes to their course of action, course that's happening in election?
I'm not going to give away any $1 million ideas on any show. One, I have a few ideas, but I think that requires discussion, debate, and one-to-one conversations. But at the bigger level, why are people still hanging on to being part of a party which is on a losing streak? And the answer is very clear. Most people who are within the ruling framework recognize that even there, they don't seem to have a voice that matters. And in this country, as Amartya Sen said a long time ago, we are an argumentative people. If you cannot argue within a system, and the opposition parties, all of them have more room for arguments than within the ruling party, then the kind of majority of Indians who love to take a view or take a contrarian view find a home in those parties rather than in a party where only one view carries and only one view can be heard.
Very nice point. Very nice point. And very correct, because we have been in a place where we have always liked to argue politics, and you can't take that from Indians no matter what. So that's a very, very nice perspective. Any other points you would like to say, that what you think could be at the moment, even with all the failings, are certain positive points that the opposition has?
You know, the thing for the opposition is the ability to recognize that India is at best a kind of temporary truce between states who have different directions to head in. This idea of one overarching, single-minded, very often bloody-minded approach to every problem is not something that characterizes the majority of Indians. The second thing is that the majority of Indians actually recognize that in diversity is strength, in diversity is pleasure, in diversity is reality. And I think that is what the opposition needs to highlight and play up. But as I said, since I'm in the business of image making and of policy advice and political management, I tend to be very, very careful and circumspect about giving advice on public platforms. Where leaders speak to me, I tend to give them hardcore advice which hopefully helps them win, which is why they keep coming back.
Okay, that's an interesting thing. And with that perspective, I would like to ask you, so because you are able to see so much of information, data on what is happening in politics, what is your predictions about things that can happen in terms of India's future, in terms of this kind of non-questioning of the ruling party, which is working very well at the moment because it gives a very squeaky clean image to whoever is in power and whoever is in control. And people taking, and whoever comes to power later also taking that up to actually keep themselves looking very clean by not having them questioning. So do you think India is going to go that path where lesser and lesser questioning is going to happen, whoever comes to power?
That's a very good question, Jaya. In terms of your summarizing your own personal, shall I say, prediction for the future. My prediction is that in such a scenario, having seen the evolution of systems over a much longer period of time than you have, my sense is that the biggest opposition is going to come from within the ruling elite. The biggest fissures are going to come between the seconds in command and the thirds in command. The biggest changes will happen because they are triggered by people within the system. Those outside the system, because they haven't had either the smarts or the technology or the money or the discipline to be able to topple this, the toppling force will actually be from within.
Okay. And if you look at what happened in Madhya Pradesh, Shivraj Singh Chauhan or Vasundhara Raje, well, they did not happen. I mean, the fact that Shivraj Singh Chauhan was so much shunted out to some extent, and he was not even made a chief ministerial candidate and not a chief minister later, not really acknowledged anything that he had done in the previous years. But you can see that it is all very tight and it's all very, there is not any dissent at all. So, because it's all a one power that is hanging it all together.
Before a dam bursts, the water level looks extremely high.
Elaborate what you want to say by that.
What I'm saying is that there is still some more space for the water to rise before the dam can burst.
Okay. I think the audience will understand what you're saying. And because
I hope so. I hope so, Jaya. And that would be a reflection of the quality of your audience. And I'm sure it's of the highest quality.
Wonderful. That's a compliment to me and to my audience as well.
And to your questions.
Thanks so much. And my last question is this, that perhaps similar to, I mean, on the lines of the previous question, where do you see the fabric of Indian politics going in the coming times? I mean, give a few scenarios that could be possible in a few timelines.
You know, the most positive scenario is where India becomes confident in itself, does not aggressively want to either taunt or tame the world, recognizes the importance of its neighbors, and most importantly, understands the rubric of what makes India unique and India exist in its current form. The worst case scenario is where the social fabric is rent because of thoughtless or deliberate actions by one group, and no single group can hold it together if even the smallest group is hurt to a stage where it is willing to respond or react either in anger or in hopelessness.
So I just specify one bit from your answer. That is, when you say what is the uniqueness India stands for, what in your mind is the uniqueness for which India stands?
I think the fact that we have so many languages, so many communities, so many microcultures developing together and moving broadly in the same direction is what we need to preserve.
And in terms of the uniqueness of its relations with neighbors, what are your recommendations?
I think you need to recognize when a neighbor is going to continue to remain hostile. You need to recognize when a so-called hostile neighbor is actually becoming more and more irrelevant. You need to recognize when the smallest of your neighbors makes the loudest of noises, to learn to ignore it. And I think that you need to take into account that in a highly interconnected world, the stance you take on any one country becomes something that other countries also respond to in their own way, sometimes publicly, very often privately.
Right. I guess you're talking about Maldives and what has transpired.
I in the statement I made, I
know you want to keep everything cryptic. Well,
I know I've covered China, I've covered Pakistan, I've involved Bangladesh and ended up in Maldives. Yes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much, Dilip, for this wonderful conversation. It is always eye-opening because I wanted your opinions, because you bring in a new perspective from the huge experience that you have. And it's wonderful to hear that always. So
thanks very much. Appreciate you having me, and thank you very much.
Thanks.